Welcome back, riders. Today I will be going over my losers of 2024. If you didn't watch last year's video, I don't consider something to be a loser just because it was bad. Rather, I look for things that underwhelmed me, or maybe I rewrote something that wasn't as good as other rides I've had on it. This list is not limited to just roller coasters, and anything's on the table really. Some of them are even more lighthearted and can be taken as a joke. In no particular order, let's jump into the list. Let's kick it off with the first loser I had during the year, and that was my one and only ride on Navi River Journey at Walt Disney World's Animal Kingdom. Going in, I knew this ride wasn't super highly regarded overall. However, seemingly everybody raved about the animatronic. So I finally bit the bullet and I rode it, mostly just to see the animatronic. We were nearing the end of the ride, and I was getting ready to see what all the hype was about, and it was not there. I got B mode, which, if you did not know, B mode is just a screen. Words cannot describe my disappointment, and I was not a happy camper. It wouldn't have been such a big deal if the animatronic wasn't the main selling point in the ride for me. For example, whenever Rise of the Resistance is in B mode, I still come off the ride pretty happy since the rest of the ride is still awesome. But Navi River Journey is the animatronic. The rest of the ride is whatever, and it was so peaceful I almost fell asleep. And from what I hear, it's pretty rare to get B mode on Navi River Journey, so I guess that's just my luck. Ever since then, I've just never found the line short enough to roll the dice again. Let's go from Disney World to Disneyland for a more lighthearted loser. I happened to find myself at Disney's California Adventure when Soarin' was running its Soarin' Over California cycle, and to celebrate, the park was giving everybody a cutie or a clementine when they were exiting the ride. When it came my turn to receive my free cutie, they were all out, and I was out of luck again. But it actually was like a double whammy because my blood sugar was actually low in that moment, so I had to scramble to find some carbs, like a Mickey bar somewhere else. Just not the best luck on the Disney properties at the beginning of the year for me. Jumping back to the East Coast, I'm actually going to lump in three roller coasters together, that being the B&M coasters at Carowinds. And yes, somehow the one exclusion out of the four B&Ms of the park was Vortex. Who could have seen that coming? Anyways, I returned to Carowinds for my first time since 2021, and my re-rides on Afterburn, Fury 325, and Thunderstriker all left a little to be desired. First off, Fury 325 is actually on the list for two reasons. One, it was down for a good chunk of my time at the park. I was there for a half day and then the majority of the next day, and I would say was only open for less than half the time I was there. And then two, once I got to get back on it, it was not quite as excellent as I remember. Nothing drastic, it's still comfortably in my top 25, but enough to go down a few spots. If you're a fan of the channel, then you know I have never seen eye to eye with Afterburn. And unfortunately, after my re-rides this past year, I am still not buying into the hype. I don't know what it is. On paper, it is so similar to Montu, and Montu is my favorite invert. But with each and every ride on Afterburn, I just get on that brake run, and I don't enjoy it nearly as much as pretty much anybody else in the world. At least that's what it seems like. And then lastly, Thunderstriker. In 2021, I respected it as a B&M hyper. I thought it was in the middle of the pack with solid airtime, which was a win in my eyes since everybody else craps on it. But my rides in 2024 just did not resonate with me. The airtime wasn't there like I thought it was in 2021. So yeah, I'm kind of in the same camp as most other people now. Back to another lighthearted one, this one taking us to Dollywood when I went there early in the year for the Coaster Crew event. I was hanging out with a group of people and I still needed the Whistlepunk Chaser credit, and they decided to join me. So all six of us ended up doing a train takeover as grown adults, but we were making fun out of it. We asked the ride operator to take our picture, and she said sure. I was in the front row, and when she was taking the picture, it seemed like I was not going to be in the frame. So I asked her if I was in it, and she said yes. We did the ride, got off, and sure enough, I was not in the picture. And we weren't going to wait 30 minutes again just to redo the picture, so yeah, I missed out on that. Now it's kind of an inside joke between us that I've never ridden it since there's no photo evidence. It was one of those stupid enthusiast moments where we're all being goofballs, but I've got nothing to show for it. Sticking at Dollywood on a more serious note, I was quite underwhelmed with Big Bear Mountain. I know it's a family coaster, but I've heard numerous people saying it is the best family coaster ever, with some people even saying it's their second favorite coaster in the park. It did not really impress me. The length is fantastic, I'll give it that, but I wasn't all that impressed with anything else. Usually I am a huge fan of onboard audio, but it was pretty forgettable in this instance. The layout was not super engaging to me without all the trees they chopped down. I don't know, I just think it's another one of those cases where I'm underwhelmed with a ride that other people praise all the time. Even my favorite amusement park is not safe from this list. Granted, it's not entirely their fault. Of course, I'm talking about Kings Island. For years now, I have wanted to visit Winterfest, but there's always some reason why I can't make it. That being weather, or being busy with the holidays, or more recently, this year and the prior year, I've kind of self imposed banned myself from parks in December just to focus on family and whatnot. Going into this past year, I was committed to going to Winterfest for one of the 2 weekends they were open in November. That went down the drain pretty quickly once Kings Island cut one of their weekends from their operating schedule in November. So I was just left with one weekend, and then that one weekend I had a wedding to attend. So yet another year went by without going to Kings Island Winterfest. Maybe next year, but I've also said that for the last 3 or 4 years now. Not many things irritate me more than going to parks that I know I won't get back to anytime soon at inopportune times, and that is exactly what happened at Steel Pier. They currently only have one roller coaster, that being a small SPF Visa coaster, Locomotion. But I say it was an inopportune time to visit because they currently have two coasters on the way: a Premier Rides Spinning Wild Mouse. Yes, I said Premier Rides. That might be like the only one in the world. And a Premier Rides Skyrocket 2. Two coasters of that scale are a pretty big deal for a boardwalk park. And I just happened to find myself there before those two coasters opened. You know what they say. I guess we'll have to come back. Oh, darn. Not far away is Sesame Place, Philadelphia, and my attempt to visit the park came up empty handed. We were at Six Flags Great Adventure, and we couldn't stay there the entire day since we had to catch flights that evening. At some point, we kind of felt done at the park, and I needed the Wacky Taxi credit, so we left early to try to get the credit. But we were racing against an incoming rainstorm, and unfortunately it ended up winning. But that wasn't before Sesame Place gave us the runaround. When we got there, they were still charging for parking, and it wasn't even raining yet, so we thought we had a chance. We walked all the way up to the front gate. It was still not raining, and they just said the park is closed. Close, but no cigar. Moving down to Texas for Roller Coaster Rodeo, we have my whole Dr. Diabolical lift climb fiasco. The trolley I had absolutely sucked and would just not glide nicely at all. So I could literally only go up like a foot at a time. Half the people in the group kept repeatedly showing me how I should be doing it, and then there was one guy in the group who was legitimately upset with me that I was holding everybody up, but I swear it was not a user error. Eventually we were halfway up the lift hill, maybe even a little more than halfway up there. And our tour guide had us go back down because it was taking too long for us to get to the top. So we went all the way back down, swapped out to get a new trolley, and then boom, I went up the lift like a champ with no hiccups. It was a super frustrating experience for not just me, but pretty much everybody in the group. But at least at the end of the day, it wasn't my fault, and we still got to complete the experience. To the home park of Six Flags Great America, and this loser is partially not their fault and partially for a good reason. But I'm still sad that I did not get to ride Demon this Fright Fest, which makes it 2 years in a row for me with no Demon Fright Fest rides. In 2023, Demon was closed for the majority of the season because of the whole rock facade fiasco. I went to Fright Fest 3 times, but it was still closed for all 3 visits. Demon eventually reopened that Fright Fest, but I was not able to visit the park again that season. I would say that is partially on the park and partially on me. Flash forward to this past season, and Demon was closed for the entirety of Fright Fest for Wrath of Rakshasa construction. Completely understandable why they closed Demon. I'm not upset with the park directly, and I definitely want Wrath of Rakshasa to open sooner rather than later, so it's a worthy sacrifice, but that doesn't mean I still can't be sad that I couldn't ride Demon during Fright Fest again. Demon during Fright Fest is one of my favorite things at any amusement park, and it's now been 2 years that it hasn't happened. Fingers crossed for 2025. Last year, I had Mr. Freeze at Six Flags St. Louis as a winner simply because I wrote it. So you might be thinking it's a loser this year because I went to the park and didn't get on it. What if I told you I actually did ride it in 2024? Not once, but twice. So why is it a loser this year then? Coming into 2024, I had 4 rides on Mr. Freeze across 9 visits to Six Flags St. Louis. In early June, I went to Six Flags over Texas for my first ever visit, and I was able to ride their Mr. Freeze 5 times, not only across an entire day, but within a 5-hour span. Yep, that's right. I rode Mr. Freeze in Texas more in 5 hours than I had in Missouri over the span of 6 years visiting the park. Easily over 48 hours of strict park time across those 9 visits, yet I rode Mr. Freeze at Over Texas more in 5 hours. Absolutely crazy. So Mr. Freeze at Six Flags St. Louis is a loser this year as a culmination of everything it has put me through over the years. Like I said, I did get on it twice this year across my 2 visits, so the new total is 6 rides and 11 visits, which is just so upsetting because it is a fantastic ride. Back to Texas we go for the other park in San Antonio, SeaWorld. The subject of this loser is their Morgan Mini Hyper Steel Eel. By all accounts, this coaster is pretty well regarded, but I did a handful of rides and I just could not get there. In my opinion, the airtime was underwhelming to solid, which overall was a letdown. I was told it was like legendary. On top of that, the ride's availability across my 2 visits were spotty at best, and unfortunately, I know why firsthand. On 2 of my rides, we got stuck on the mid-course brake run, and we were absolutely baked sitting up there. I think the first time was for about 20 minutes. We were there for a while. And then the second time was 5 to 10 minutes. And we were just getting absolutely burnt in the Texas hot, warm summer sun. When my Texas trip was all said and done, I had one of the worst sun blisters ever on my forehead, and I'm putting a good chunk of the blame on Steel Eel. After over 10 years of driving past Worlds of Fun during the off season, I finally visited the park for the first time in 2024. While I had a good time at the park, and overall I do enjoy the park, and I do look forward to returning one day, my experience with the ride line up there left a bit to be desired. First off, there were two closed credits, the Boomerang and Spinning Dragons, which, to be fair, if any two coasters had to be closed in the park, those were some pretty good options, but still. I also missed Cyclone Sam, which I was upset about. It was closed on one of my 2 days there, and then when it was open, the line was pretty absurd. The one time I did end up getting in line for it, I was going to be on the next cycle and then someone threw up. Those were 3 rides I missed, and then there were 3 more rides that underwhelmed me. Patriot was a low tier invert, which to be fair I was kind of expecting going in, but still it was disappointing to get on a new invert and not be a huge fan of it. Zambezi Zinger was meh. Some people really, really hate the restraints, and I'm almost in that camp. I didn't enjoy them, but there are worse out there. I think the layout is solid, but it was just kind of rough at times too. Overall, for a park that had not gotten a new roller coaster in 14 years, it's a bit of a disappointing addition. And then lastly, I'm going to throw in Prowler into the mix. Not nearly as much of a letdown as the other two, but still, Uncle Nate was hyping this thing up big time, just like Renegade. And just like Renegade, I found it good, but not life changing. So overall, there were a handful of rides I missed, and there were a handful of rides that let me down, which is a little bit of a bummer after finally getting to visit the park after all these years. Crossing over the Atlantic to Alton Towers, we have the Intamin Multi-Dimension Coaster 13. I did enjoy this coaster, but I am highlighting one specific aspect of this coaster as a loser, and that was the trim brake on the first drop. I feel like if I consider any trim brake to be the worst trim brake in the world, then it has to make the losers list. So here we are. This trim brake puts any trim brake on the beast to shame. I had no idea about it going in, so maybe it's suffering a little bit from being an unpleasant surprise, but I swear it felt like it took away half of the potential top speed. It was so bad. Staying at Alton Towers for without a doubt one of the biggest losers of the year, the Great Coasters International Wooden Coaster Wicker Man. Maybe this is partially my fault because I had some pretty high expectations. I set my expectations pretty high because 1, I love GCI, 2, I know the theming was going to be good, and 3, I was a big fan of Invader at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, which is a very similar coaster in scale. I will give credit where it is due. The theming was fantastic. But strictly from a layout and forces experience and perspective, it was very, very weak. I was so disappointed with my 2 rides on this GCI. Sticking at Alton Towers yet again, but this time only partially, I grouped together everything with the name Nemesis in it. At Alton Towers, you have Nemesis Reborn and Nemesis Subterra, and at Thorpe Park, you have Nemesis Inferno. Nemesis Inferno is not that much of a loser, as I didn't really have any expectations going in. It has decent theming, and I like the pre-lift, but I thought the main layout was quite short and unoriginal. It's honestly mostly a loser for me because everybody else in my group was a much bigger fan of it than I was. Swinging back to Alton Towers, Nemesis Subterra was quite the experience. Part dark ride, part drop tower, part haunt, while not really being good at any of those 3 experiences. The drop, air quotes, I stress the air quotes here. The drop is a joke. It's so small. I think I've taken a bigger fall off a diving board at a community pool. The haunt portion on Nemesis Subterra was so poor, it makes Ghost Train at Thorpe Park look like the greatest haunt of all time. And then the dark ride elements of the ride were decent. I liked the pre-show and the overall storyline isn't half bad, but the verify on the ride vehicle is absolutely horrible, and the boarding process took way too long because of it, and it broke up all the momentum that the pre-show and the story were going for. Then lastly, we have Nemesis Reborn. Don't get me wrong, this is definitely a solid coaster. The theming is fantastic, and it is probably the most unique invert out there. But best invert in the world? No shot, at least in my book. Moving from the UK to Poland, I have a pair of losers from Landia. Let's start with one of their many kids coasters, Draken. Typically speaking, kids coasters aren't really in consideration for this video. I don't expect enough from kids coasters to be let down all that much, but let me tell you, I had a pretty awful time on Draken. My knee ended up being wedged between like the train chassis and the restraint, and it was downright painful. I have never wanted to get off a coaster more urgently than during my ride on Draken. This is definitely a contender for my least favorite roller coaster of all time, so I think that warrants a spot on this list, even if it is a kid's coaster. And then, of course, if you know me personally or watched any of my post-trip videos from Europe this past year, you know Zadra was a pretty big letdown for me. I was never really able to pinpoint why. I gave Zadra numerous chances, and I just couldn't get there. The weather wasn't the best when we were there, being rainy at times and not that hot, so maybe it wasn't running as fast as it could, and the pacing was not world class like it was supposed to be, at least from what I've heard. For me, it definitely felt like the elements should have been popping more than they were. I was fully expecting this to be my favorite coaster on my Europe trip last year, and it didn't even end up top 3. That's back-to-back years where a European RMC was probably my biggest loser of the year. I don't know what it is, but I wish it wasn't the case. All right, now we're going to move on to a lot of miscellaneous losers where I grouped a bunch of roller coasters and or rides together. Let's start with the credits I missed this year. It was actually another good year of not missing that many credits and or important ones on my Europe trip, as I rode 49 of the 51 available on the trip. The bigger of the two was Devil's Loop at Legendia. I'm a little bummed I wasn't able to ride this, as I have never been on a Socket coaster, and I'm sure it would have been a very unique experience in the backwards row. But honestly, I'm okay with this being the biggest coaster that I missed on my trip to Europe. Back in the States, Hydrus at Casino Pier was a pretty big miss, as that is the main reason to go to that park. It's their headliner. And then the biggest missed credit of the year had to be Wonder Woman at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas. I went to Roller Coaster Rodeo and was able to see them testing the new trains, but unfortunately it was not open to us. So yet again, an original layout Raptor coaster eluded me. Let's move from missed credits to missed rerides. The smallest of the three I chose was Jolly Rancher Remix. I actually really liked this coaster, but when I was there for McLovin's bachelor party, nobody really wanted to do it, so I was out of luck there. I was outnumbered. My second pick was Emperor at SeaWorld San Diego. I went to the park one day in 2023 and one day in 2024, and both days Emperor was really going through it and was hardly open. I squeezed in one ride in 2023, but I was not as lucky in 2024, which is upsetting because a lot of people really praise this coaster, but with only one ride, I don't really have a good feel for it. I've been dying to get back on it, but it wasn't on the cards this time. Then the biggest reride I missed out on was X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain. In last year's loser video, I had X2 as a loser because it was only running one train and there was no audio playing in the station. Turns out I should have been a little more grateful because I didn't even get to ride it in 2024. We just talked about missed rerides, so let's touch on some underwhelming and disappointing rerides. I was finally able to get back on Runaway Mine Train at Six Flags Great Adventure for the first time in 10 years. I was in the very, very, very early stages of being a coaster enthusiast when I first rode it, so I didn't remember anything really. Coming into my reride this year, I knew about the epic airtime hill, but even beyond that, When we were in the park, Uncle Nate was really hyping it up as one of the better mine trains. The airtime hill is legit, it's good, but I think everything else was lackluster. So yet again, Uncle Nate hyped it up too much for me. Sticking on the East Coast, I really discovered that Candemonium is mid. In my visits to the park in 2021 and 2022, I really liked Candemonium. Not one of the best hypers, but a respectable one. Maybe it was due to the addition of Wildcat's Revenge, but Candemonium was such an afterthought this year. We rode it once the entire weekend, and that one ride was not it. Of course, I have to talk about Screamin' Eagle at Six Flags St. Louis yet again. If you don't know the story, my first ever ride on it was amazing. Yet every single ride since then has been so underwhelming. The airtime pretty much disappeared for me compared to my first ride. I got back on it this year and it actually threw a curveball at me. The airtime came back, but my gosh, was it rough. Rough enough to the point that I'm still going to have it as a loser this year. Although I've heard it's getting some gravity group retracking this off season, so maybe 2025 is finally the year I like the coaster again. Last but not least, I finally experienced the polarizing nature of Storm Chaser at Kentucky Kingdom. Or should I say Wind Chaser? Not yet. For my 3 visits to Kentucky Kingdom, Storm Chaser was running amazingly and consistent. It was absolutely hauling. That was not the case this year. It was slow and sluggish. I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, as 3 of my 4 visits were fantastic, and this past year was definitely the worst weather conditions I've ridden it in, but man, it was a bit of a downer this year. It was another year of not getting my milestone coasters right. I started with the big 500, that being achieved on freaking Super Growers Boxcar Derby at Sesame Place, San Diego. Not only is it a very small coaster, but it was on a Zero Force, which I semi-seriously hate on. 550 and 600 were at least bigger coasters, but looking back, I wish I had chosen different coasters in their respective parks. 550 was Prowler at Worlds of Fun, which we already touched on in this video, how I was slightly underwhelmed with it, but I really wish I picked Mamba instead because I was absolutely blown away with Mamba. I'm just going to tell you ahead of time that Mamba was one of the biggest winners of 2024. Far and away the best coaster in the park, so I wish I went that route instead. Number 600 was the big one at Pleasure Beach Resort, or as we better know it, Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Going into my visit, I was expecting Icon to be my favorite coaster in the park, but I still chose Big One to be the milestone coaster since it is a milestone coaster. It's a rare aero hyper and one of the most famous coasters, and I was expecting it to firmly be my second favorite coaster in the park. I can live with that as a milestone coaster. Big One did not live up to its end of the bargain. It's not nearly as good as its legendary status suggests. It was not my first, second, third, not even my 4th favorite coaster in the park. I ended up placing it 5th in the park. So yeah, messed up that milestone coaster again. Maybe the most unique loser, but if you recall from my vlogs from Knott's Berry Farm early in the year, then you know I had a rough time with my pass working. For whatever reason, when I pulled up to Knott's Berry Farm, my pass was not working. It was saying it was not valid, it wasn't syncing, and sometimes when you scanned it, a different person came up, and it was a big, gigantic mess. I went to Knott's 3 times that week, and they charged me for parking twice, and getting into the park all 3 days was rough. They gave me the runaround. Most notably, I had to wait 80 minutes at guest services one of those 3 days just to get my entitlements like the drink plan and fast lane. It was such a time sink, which especially sucks having to do it at a park that is not your home park. Every minute at Knott's means something to me, and between the 3 days, they probably wasted 2 to 2.5 hours of my life just trying to use my pass. Eventually, I complained about this on Reddit, and someone who works for Cedar Fair corporate reached out to me. That was kind of weird, but they fixed it, and now I'm grateful for that. So, oh well, that's time I'm never going to get back. I've got two coasters that have very similar stories that I'm going to consider losers, but hear me out on this one. I'm talking about two of the bigger 2024 revamps for existing coasters, Lightning Rod at Dollywood and Skyrush at Hershey Park. Heck, you could probably throw in Top Throw 2 at Cedar Point in there since it was only open for like a week, but I'm not including Top Throw 2 because I got on it and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm including Lightning Rod and Skyrush because they both moved down in my rankings after their new versions. Lightning Rod did not move down as far as I thought it would, but still, I missed that launch and I moved it down a few spots. Skyrush took the bigger hit in my rankings, going from within my top 10 to outside my top 25. The old restraints did hurt me, but man, that version of the ride was off the walls. It was the craziest coaster ever, in my opinion. With the new restraints, yes, it is more comfortable, but it killed most of the insane laterals. Now, I do want to make it clear, while I am considering them losers for me, both of these revamps are massive winners for the park. Lightning Rod was incredibly reliable this year. It runs like clockwork now, and that is extremely important to Dollywood and their operations. And Skyrush should start to see an increase in ridership once word gets around that it isn't painful anymore. These were both great moves by each park that I'm not mad specifically at the park about, and I totally respect what they did. They're good moves. Just for me personally, those coasters aren't in their prime anymore, and I'll always reminisce about those old days. For the last loser of 2024, I have a more lighthearted and unique one centered around the Chance Chaos. The Chance Chaos is a flat ride which, according to Coasterpedia, all of them are either closed or their status is unknown, which I'm sure is safe to assume they're closed. If there are any that are still open, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But going into the year, I didn't really know that they were all closed. It's not a ride model I've ever done, and it's not one that I think about all that much. But yeah, I'd love to do one if I had the opportunity. 2024 presented the two closest chances I've ever had and may ever have. Going into my visit to the Adventure Dome, Roller Coaster Insider Cam was telling me that they had one, and I was excited to finally get to do one. To this day, like as I'm recording this, Chaos is still listed on the website with no indication that it is literally completely gone from the park. Yep, that's right. Walked around the park. You can see the plot where it used to be. Poof, it's gone. It's not there. Oh well, I guess. At that point, I still did not know that every single Chance Chaos was probably closed for good. Fast forward to the summer, and I ended up at Kingsburg Amusement Park. If you have never been there, I'm just going to be blunt. This place is a dump. It's probably the dirtiest and most rundown park I've ever been to. I hate being blunt like that, but I'm just telling you how it is. So you can imagine my shock when we were walking around the park and stumbled upon a Chance Chaos. Of course, though, it was closed, like closed. It was in horrible shape with rust everywhere, cars just laying face down in the ground, not organized at all. It was a mess. It looked apocalyptic. So yeah, not really close to getting on a Chance Chaos, but I kind of had two teases in there. And that is going to do it for this video. Feel free to let me know in the comments below any of your own personal letdowns during the 2024 season. If you like this video, feel free to check out my 2023 losers video, which can be found in the upper right hand corner of your screen or in the description below. Thank you for checking out the video and see you next time. Push down, pull up, exit to the right. Hope you enjoyed the video and go have your greatest day yet. Choo choo, bye.